Good evening. You're watching Gumbo Live. I'm LC Green. We're right here at Bread Basket. We converted into our studio, and we're here filming Gumbo Live every Thursday night. You can pick this program up at 7 o'clock every Thursday night on channel 97 or 15 point something if you have a flat screen, 15.1 if you have a flat screen TV, but you don't have the cable box. And if you're watching us right now, that means you're in good shape. But we ask that you would continue to support this program and stick your head in the bread basket sometime and tell them thank you for allowing us to be here. I'm very honored. I'm very, very, very honored to have as my guest, and I want to say my special guest because he's special, and I thank him for his friendship ever since I've been in the Eufaula area. And he has a job that's a thankless job. And I want to introduce to you now and Mr. Chip Chapman, the coroner for Barber County. You're going to help me with that, with your title now. Help me with that. Thank you, sir, for being here. I really appreciate you being here. We always assume that everybody knows you. But just in case there are some that don't know, just tell us about yourself, your family, whatever.
I'm a lifelong resident of Eufaula. I'm married. My wife's Tina. We have 3 kids. I'm a funeral director here at Chapman Funeral Home, and I'm your elected coroner.
All right, elected. That's now. How long, Mr. Chapman, have you been serving in the position of coroner?
At the end of this term, I will have been the coroner 16 years, which is 4 terms, and I served briefly as a deputy coroner prior to becoming the coroner.
And for the record now, we got to do this for FCC. He's not a candidate. He's not a candidate because nobody ran against him. That's always a good sign when you go up for an office and nobody challenges you. That means you're doing an outstanding job.
I consider myself lucky.
Yeah. So we want to thank you, and I need to say that. So if any other candidates out there listening, he's not a candidate. He's not a candidate, and he's here to give us a better understanding of his job. What is the main purpose of your job? Why do Barber County have to have you? Why we have to have you?
Well, the state statute says the coroner's job is to determine the time of death and the cause of death. Determining the cause of death is kind of out of the realm of an expertise of a guy who's become elected coroner in a rural county. Mm-hmm. A coroner, of course, depends on forensics departments and investigators to help derive the cause of death. In a rural county such as Barber, the roles of the coroner have kind of been unofficially expanded into other things. Who's going to respond at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning? You're not going to have a physician typically that's going to respond at any time of the day, and sometimes it's not convenient. Meeting with the families is expanded into circumstances where you have a person that's not from Eufaula that has unfortunately died in a car wreck or a hotel here. You have to have somebody that's willing to step forward and actually take custody of the person to make the decisions, at least temporarily, until the family member can be contacted.
Now, let me ask a couple of things based on what you said. Number one, every county has a coroner.
Yes, there's 67 counties, and every county has its own coroner.
Mm-hmm. One per county?
Yes, the Alabama legislature created deputy coroners. The deputy coroners serve at the will of the coroner, and it depends each county, but a deputy coroner for Barber County does not cost the county any additional money, and there have been several deputies for Barber County, but they're at no expense to the county. In other words, I am paid or reimbursed for the expenses for a coroner death, and then if a deputy responds, the money essentially filtered through me and handed to the deputy. So he's actually paid whatever the county would normally pay me, but it's not additional expenses.
Okay, well that's good. Now let's go back to this. Let's go back to out of town. Someone from out of town, and you find them dead at one of the hotels, or they get in an accident. So you're saying it's your responsibility in your job to take possession of that body and notify the family?
No.
No.
By statute, it is to arrive at the scene, determine the time of death and the cause, and officially, that's the end of my duty. But in a county like Barber, it has been expanded into more than just that. You're tying up assets at a hotel. You would have, you use that example of car wreck.
Sure.
You would have rescue squads, fire trucks, police officers, investigators, and at some point it gets to where you're actually wasting the asset of the department to keep police officers and firemen and rescue squads tied up. Somebody needs to be there to say, okay, I'll take custody and I'll be in charge from this point. So it's actually expanded into much more in a rural county.
Out of necessity.
Out of necessity to facilitate things, to let those other first responders get back to being able to respond to emergency calls.
If I'm working at the hotel and I find out that somebody's dead, can I just call a funeral home to come get it, or must you come first?
Well, I have had people that call me directly to respond to a death where a family member has died at home. But typically, in most cases, when a person finds somebody, the first shock of finding them is to run and dial 911. So 99% of the time, a person at a hotel or at a house or at a hunting club or anywhere, they would have most of the time
Call 911.
And then a rescue squad would respond. And by the time I have gotten there, a heart monitor's been hooked to them and they've been checked, and just like if they went into an emergency room.
But what I'm trying to establish, can a body be moved from where it's found before you get there in your role as the coroner?
It's not supposed to be.
Okay.
But once again, you would have to take the situation into consideration each single time. If a person was deceased in the middle of a 4-lane road, and for the safety of the public or the officers, obviously somebody, a first responder would call me and say, hey, we're in a dangerous situation, can we move the body? Well, of course, I would say,
sure,
for the safety of you and the public, move it. But typically you would not move it until the coroner has arrived.
Now, I was up at the hospital one night when a fella died in the emergency room, but nobody could be called until you got there. Is that typical?
All right, the coroner responds to any unattended death in the county. What you run into an emergency room, especially if there is no medical history at that hospital of that patient, most doctors will shy away from signing a death certificate because they don't know any circumstances other than this person came in the door. The person could have had some kind of a criminal act done toward them prior to walking in the door. So the physician obviously is going to back away and let the next steps take forward. And when I arrive and I hear what's happened, I may be charged with notifying the district attorney's office or the local police department based on what I was told. So most physicians will shy away from wanting to certify a death certificate. The other cases are any time that a person has died that is not under the direct care of a physician. If somebody dies at home, a car wreck, just any unattended death that a physician was not over the care of the patient.
So it boils down to either the physician or you signing. We're talking about the death certificate now? Is that what we're talking about? The death certificate has to be signed.
The death certificate is a two-part certificate. The funeral home completes essentially the top half, and the coroner or the physician complete the bottom half. Now in Alabama, the medical examiner, the state of Alabama medical examiner can certify a death certificate, which you vary from state to state. If you go across the bridge into Georgetown, a registered nurse can do a pronouncement when it's a hospice death, where in Alabama a registered nurse cannot sign a death certificate. But typically in Alabama, there's three people: the physician, the coroner, or the medical examiner.
I used to watch Quincy all the time. I used to love Quincy, and I always thought Quincy was the coroner, but Quincy was the medical examiner. And that's the difference between the two.
Right. Now medical examiner is typically a doctor. our state pathologists, they're actually doctors at the Department of Forensics.
So you can serve, so you can serve as, in your position without being a doctor?
Yes, the coroner is an elected position, just like the sheriff or city council, but it's a county-wide election. You have to qualify with the party that you choose to run in, and then hopefully get elected.
Yeah, well, and you've done it, what's it, 4 times?
4 times.
4 times, well, that says a lot. Now, this sounds like a strange question because of the work you do. But I ask this question to everybody: you enjoy your job?
Yes. Which may sound strange, but most people consider the coroner in law enforcement, I guess, as every kid wanted to be a fireman or a police officer.
Right.
I can kind of still, I guess, be involved in it, but if somebody is a coroner in a county like Barber, there's really not a financial gain to being the coroner. It's going to be a person that wants to serve. Essentially, being the coroner, the county pays me enough, really and truly, to reimburse me for my expenses. I certainly don't make money being the coroner, and the responsibilities of being on call, a lot of people would shy away from it because of you being tied down so much, and sometimes it's not pleasant, and the average person a lot of times doesn't want to be exposed to what a first responder, a paramedic, or the coroner, or police officers are exposed to.
Now, when was the first time that you knew that that's what you wanted to do, along with the funeral home business?
Well, the previous coroner was employed at our family business, and then my uncle was the coroner. And between the two, they were the coroners probably 35 years together. And being a teenager, if your mom and daddy own a shoe store, on Saturdays and Sundays, summertime break, you had to come sell shoes. And as a teenager, obviously, the family owned the funeral home, so
Sure.
I had to come work at the funeral home. And being a kid, just being exposed to being in the middle of firemen and police officers and the coroner and seeing it, I knew as a kid, probably 15 or 16 years old, that I wanted to be the coroner.
Now, you said something, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year.
Well, that's why it was,
That's what it takes.
prior to the legislature creating deputy coroners, you could not legally have a deputy coroner. So it was a huge relief when the legislature did it. If I'm out of town or if I was sick, and Barber County is such a large county, the response time from one end to the other, an example is, if I was in Spring Hill and there was a death in Blue Springs, it is a huge travel time.
Sure.
So it works out to have a deputy coroner on the west side of the county, and then me or a deputy coroner on the east side for time, convenience of the family, and once again, tying up law enforcement and emergency assets. If they have to wait on me, they could possibly be in a dangerous situation longer, waiting on me to respond.
So you do have that, though? You do have deputies?
Yes, I do have deputy coroners.
Are they sworn deputies, or
Yes.
that necessary?
Paul Gullidge is a deputy coroner, and he's on the Clayton Rescue Squad. And then Kim Benefield works at the funeral home. He's a deputy coroner.
Okay. So that gives you maybe a little vacation
Gives
time
me
with the
some
family.
relief, yes.
Yeah. And what's the age of your children? You say have 3 children?
Yes.
I'm glad you got to answer that question, not me.
29, 30, and 31.
Okay, all right. I got 3 girls, man, and after I asked you that question, I said, hope you don't be versing on me. But now, the Barber County is a large county.
Yes, sir.
It's a large county, and it can be very time-consuming. And taking all that in consideration, I think we owe you a great big thank you for the job that you do, and as much time as necessary to do that job. Now let me ask you this here: how much contact do you actually have with the family of a deceased?
Well, it will vary. on the example that you used, somebody from out of town that dies here in a car wreck or a hotel had very little exposure to a family. A lot of times it's either a phone call or a third person where we notify a police department at that person's home that has to make a notification. But it will vary from family to family. If I have to make a notification to a family, or if somebody dies at home. Sometimes I have a lot of time spent with a family waiting for a funeral home to get there, which I always try to stay at the death scene until the funeral home arrives to help the funeral directors, introduce the funeral director to the family if they don't know them. So my exposure will vary from death to death. Sometimes just a couple of minutes, sometimes a phone call, sometimes an hour.
So the main responsibility of notifying the family of a deceased falls on?
Well, it's going to vary. Of course, that's not something that most people want to have to do. State troopers typically do it, a police officer.
Okay.
If I do it, I try to find out who the family's pastor is and get them to go with me. And I have a couple of pastors that have volunteered that I do call to go with me, but it's not very pleasant.
I can imagine. Now let's talk about this. Let's talk about the funeral home. You're in the funeral home business. Who determines or what determines where the deceased goes so far as funeral home is concerned?
That's strictly up to the family, and there's a line there that you don't want to cross because of ethics and putting influence on a family member. I think most people will tell you that I go way over the line not to put pressure on a family member. Because, ethically, somebody could say a coroner should not be tied to a funeral home. But in a county like Barber, Pike County, Bullitt County, Henry County, Dothan, most coroners are tied to a funeral home because the responsibilities go hand in hand. You have 24-hour communication to the funeral home. You have the vehicles, the equipment that's needed. So it typically goes hand in hand in small or rural counties. But there's definitely a line a coroner doesn't need to cross because of the conflict of interest of being a funeral director and being the coroner.
All right, now let's go back to our out of town scenario. We got somebody from out of town. All right, we got to get them out of the hotel. We got to get them out of the street. Where we take them?
Typically, what I do if a death occurs anywhere in the county and it's unknown who that person is, or we have an identification card on them, but we have no idea who the family members are. Well, that's one of those times that somebody has to kind of step forward. And traditionally what I do is I call the closest geographical funeral home to where that person is dead. So if they were on the north end of the county, I would consider who is the closest funeral home to where that person or where that scene is, because I'm taking the initiative to call somebody. That's where it would become a conflict of interest if I have a personal tie to a funeral home. If I were to call my funeral home every time there's an unclaimed body, well, then there's a conflict of interest. So what I typically will do is if there's a death in Clayton, I would call a Clayton funeral home. I would not call from our hearse to go to Clayton. If there's a death in Clio, unattended, can't make the notification, I would call the closest Clio funeral home.
Now look, let me ask you this question, and we have discussed this before, and this is a real situation. We live in a real world. When you notify a funeral home, does race have something to do with that?
As far as the funeral home, it should not.
It should not.
You're right. That comes down to a preference of the deceased family's decision.
Let's go back to the scenario of out of town, not knowing the family, but we got a body we got to deal with. So you call the closest funeral home regardless.
Typically, which not to be offensive to a person that has a preference.
Sure.
If it was a African American or black person, I would try obviously to call, because once again you get into a conflict of interest, whether it be a Hispanic, white, black, Asian. As far as the coroner's office, that should not have any bearing or anything, and it really in a business, whether it be a funeral home or the hardware store.
Right, I agree with you.
The race of the customer shouldn't have any merit.
And the reason why I know that, because I am a national resident EMT. And when the ambulance go to a situation, they got to take you to the closest hospital.
Right.
And most folks say, I don't want to go to the hospital. Well, you don't have no other choice. We got to take you to the closest. And once we get you to the closest, if you want to go somewhere else, then then we make arrangements for that. But when you call 911, we got to take you to the closest regardless.
Right.
And so you're saying that's the same way it should be with your office. The closest funeral home.
Right.
Regardless, the closest funeral home would be your first call.
Typically it should. Now, if a local person, let's say Miss Jones were to die, and I knew that Miss Jones had used a particular funeral home for her husband's funeral, and she was found dead in the street. Nobody is there to officially tell me to use their particular funeral home, but because this is a small community, and I knew that Miss Jones had used XYZ funeral home, I would take it upon myself, if that person was black, white, or Hispanic, or whatever, had they used a particular funeral home in the past, well, I would take the initiative to call that funeral home, because technically I could call who I want, but that could be offensive to the family.
That's right.
Let's say it was a black person, and I called a white funeral home knowing that they had used XYZ funeral home, that would become, offensive to them. And it also gets back to that ethical line. Am I friends with the owner of this funeral home, knowing that the family would have used another funeral home? There's that kind of ethical line that you want to stay within for the benefit of the family.
Ain't that something that we just can't? Let me ask you this here. Let's talk about this. Tell me some of the advantages of being in. Well, this is not a small county, but the fact that we are. I'm gonna use the words close knit. What are the advantages and disadvantages of that, if any?
Well, obviously knowing each other, it removes some of the pressures when you know the family, but sometimes it adds pressure. If it was a close personal friend and I drive up at a death scene.
Right.
So it could go both ways. It could create tension or pressure one way or the other. But being in a small community definitely has its advantages, and being a small town funeral director, a coroner, a pastor, some people would like it and some people wouldn't.
Sure. Now, let me ask you this: what changes? Number one, that you would like to see, and number two, what changes is possibly before the legislature? Is there any particular, so far to make your job either easier? Is there any particular change that you would like to see? And are there any proposed changes right now before the legislators?
Obviously, any department head is always going to say funding, so I would like to have more funding for expenses, which that's a county commission issue. There's really not any state issues. One is online death certificates that the state of Alabama is trying to implement and mandate, but there's too much ambiguous issues with it. Out-of-state physicians signing doctors, funeral homes or coroners that have less than 10 deaths to register in a year. They don't have to do them online. But it's the newest thing is our world goes to paperless systems eventually. Everybody will be on even a paperless death certificate.
Yeah. Now you said something a while ago. You talked about the county commissioners. I'm trying to find the right. Who you're accountable to? Are you accountable to the county commissioner? Who are you as the Barber County coroner, Mr. Chip Chapman? Who are you accountable to?
The voters first.
Okay. All right.
Second would be ethics, Alabama Ethics Commission. Other than that, obviously, the county commission is the board that funds anything that pertains to the coroner, expense account, payment for being a coroner. But as far as having a person that you would go to over my head, there's really not anybody unless I have done something ethically wrong or I've displeased the voters. Of course, they don't have to re-elect me. Main thing is I answer to the voters.
That's interesting. I don't know about want that. I don't know about want that. So you go to the county for funding, but the county has no say so on how you do your job. Am I correct with saying that?
That's correct.
And if we had a complaint, the election is over. You got another 4 years, 4-year terms.
Yes, for 4 years.
So you got another 4 years before you get elected again, or you decide to run again. When we hope you will. But in the meantime, if something happened, and you use the word ethical, something unethical happened, what would we do?
If somebody felt that I had done something unethically, whether it be the county sheriff, the county coroner, or anybody else, you would report it to the Alabama Ethics Commission.
Okay.
Now, obviously, I would hope if I've done something offensive or displeasing to somebody, I would certainly hope they would either call me or come say, hey, I wasn't happy with you about this. I would hope they would let me know it.
Mm-hmm.
But no, the county commission does not instruct the coroner or the sheriff how to conduct their department.
And one reason why I wanted you on here, that we talked about, is the fact that a lot of folks don't know your job. We have no idea. Well, we got an idea, but normally it's not the right idea of what your job consists of. And I said when I started this program, when I started Gumbo Live, that I wanted it to be entertaining, but I also wanted it to be informative. And we are learning some things today. We're learning some things today that nobody controls. And we like elected officials that's not controlled by nobody. We like elected officials that know that they are responsible to the voters. And that's we talk many times about term limit. That's why you vote. That's term limit right there.
Right,
we ain't got to say
your term limit.
Right. We ain't got to say but I want to say that there's a lot of things that we don't know. A lot of things we don't know. You don't actually have to do any investigational cases, or do you?
Now, obviously, I'm not trained to investigate a crime scene. That's where the investigators at the police department or the sheriff's department come in to play to do their job. If it's to a certain degree that it's beyond what they do, that's when you would call it the forensics department. So, no, as far as training to investigate a crime scene, I don't have.
Okay, now you remember when you first told me, you said that you got to get on the scene and you got to try to find how long a person been dead and the cause of death. Okay, now just in the elementary, what is the process of determining the cause of death? And
whenever you certify a death certificate, you have to take into the circumstances of the person. If I go to a house and a man has died and his wife is there and he said, well, he's had so-and-so cancer and he's also had 3 heart attacks. Well, you can, by process of elimination, determine he probably either had a heart attack or his cancer created issues that led to his death. In an emergency room or a hospital setting, hopefully you have medical records. But as far as determining the time of death, the easiest way is who saw them last, and then when were they found, and you can determine at least between a certain time frame when a person died.
Briefly, people when an autopsy. Tell us who determines if an autopsy is necessary, and what happens if I say, man, Mark, my friend Mark died, I want an autopsy, I believe something happened. Can I do that, or can you do? Who determines?
In Alabama, the only person that has the legal authority to order an autopsy is the district attorney. The chief of police, an investigator, or the coroner can want one, but the ultimate decision lies with the district attorney in every district. So in Bullock and Barber County, obviously the decision rests with the district attorney.
So if I want one and the district attorney say no, that's it.
Right. Now, autopsies done by the Department of Forensics, which are requested by the district attorney, they are for criminal purposes. Now, a family that wants to know a medical history, say something genetic, that, well, why did this person die? Is what affected him going to affect the grandkids? All right, those autopsies are done for criminal cases. If there's reason to suspect that a crime was committed, those autopsies are not done just for knowledge that the family may want. They're done to put somebody in jail who hurt the person that caused their death. Other than that, that's not why the forensics department is there. They're there for the criminal acts that occur or done to a person.
So I just can't willy-nilly ask the DA, say, I want you to order autopsy. It got to be a criminal act before autopsy can be
Well, what happens?
ordered. Is that correct?
Right. If you went that way, and anybody could do them, and everybody was doing, you would bog down the system to where you could never catch up, which our Department of Forensics is underfunded and overworked, which that's a state legislature problem. But you could bog down the system so bad that, if you doubled or tripled the caseload of forensics. So you have to have some common sense on the part of the district attorney or an investigator who you send for an autopsy. But usually the question is going to be asked, what reason do you have to believe that a crime was committed that led to this person's death?
Okay, now you said something about medical. If I wanted to make sure there was nothing generic wrong with my family, could I get one on, based on that?
A family has the right to do a privately funded autopsy, which there are several counties here, families in Barber County that have done it, that I know for a fact did it for personal reasons that they wanted to know genetically or some unexplained.
So now we're talking about pay. Now we're talking about pay.
Right, that falls
Did the
back
DA
on
pay for it, or did he pay for it? If I wanted, I pay for it?
The Alabama Department of Forensics funding provides the autopsies that are requested by the individual district attorneys.
Okay,
All right?
okay.
That's at no cost to the family.
Okay.
All right. The transportation has been passed on by the legislature to the county commissions. Our county commission is paying for the transportation. Anytime there's an autopsy ordered, the county commission is funding the transportation to forensics. Then the individual municipality reimburses the county commission. But as far as a privately funded autopsy, the family has the right to request a private pathologist to do an autopsy.
And they pay for it?
That's at the family's expense.
Okay. Now that's what I'm trying to say. The DA ordered, then the county, whoever paid for
The
it.
state actually.
State pay for it. If I want it, then I got to pay for transportation and the actual autopsy. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, transportation. That's the business side of it. Mm-hmm. How is that handled?
All right.
Is there a roster? Or do we call the funeral home? I mean, how does the DA say, you take this body down? Where Montgomery is closest?
Mr. Montgomery. All right. The transportation currently is done by J&S Morticians, which is a contract transport company. Once again, it removes that ethical issue of who's transporting bodies and are they going to benefit from it. I think there's a coroner right now that is in some kind of trouble in North Alabama where he had his own company that was transporting people to and from the forensics department. But if you got into a rotation and if you used funeral homes to rotate it, well, let's say XYZ funeral home transported on Monday, and then there's a wreck in front of XYZ funeral home. Well, the next one on the rotation is in Clayton. So if you go by rotation, I would have to call a funeral home in Clayton to come over here to pick up somebody who died at the front door of XYZ funeral home because they were on the rotation last. Mm-hmm. Rotation is good in theory, but as far as transport companies, there's not a Barber County transport company that's in the mortuary business. You could use funeral homes, but then you get into rotation and the logistics of rotation and how far is this funeral home from where the death is, from the death scene. And obviously you want to stay away from favoritism.
Sure. Now you used the word contract, and we almost finished. You said that we contract with JNS or what?
All right, there's no contract with JNS.
Okay,
They are a contract company. They do the transportation for Barber County, Henry County. They used to do it for Houston County. I think they do it for Pike County.
Okay.
They do it for Quitman County. They're insured to whatever these county commissions require, but their price is fair. They're responsible, dependable.
but that again, that goes back to the county commissioners and not you.
Right. Well, the district attorney's office and we call the contract company to come to pick the bodies up, to take them to Montgomery, and then they bring them back, which what it is at no expense to the family. And that's the biggest thing, is you don't want to incur additional expenses to a family that's had a death. But there's not an actual contract between JNS and Barber County.
Okay.
But the county commission covers the expense, and then the county commission invoices the municipality that has jurisdiction over the case.
Okay, all right. Well, I have personally enjoyed this, and every time I've talked to you, even off camera, I've always enjoyed our conversations. And again, I want to say to you, I thank you for your friendship. Is there anything that you would like to say to our viewing audience? You already said thank you for your election and allowing you to run unopposed this time, and that says a lot about you. But is there anything you would like to say before we close?
Well, I appreciate Barber County and the voters allowing me to serve. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to continue. Barber County's been good to me, and the voters are good to me, and I appreciate them.
You have any aspirations to do anything besides?
I just want to be good at that. I certainly don't want any. There's not many ways that the voter can get mad at the coroner. I certainly don't want anything in elected position that
They can get mad
people
at
can
you.
get upset about, other than a response time or something like that. But that's about as high on the election ladder that I want to get.
Mass hurricanes and stuff like that, when there are multiple deaths, you still got to make every scene.
Now, on a mass casualty event, if you actually get to a point that the assets of the area can't handle it, let's say if a plane happened to crash here and there were 50 or 60 fatalities, where you would actually be beyond what the local funeral directors could have. Something like that, if it was a mass casualty, obviously the coroner would have to ask the funeral directors to please come help. With employees, embalming, or identification. If it got to a certain point, the coroner could request FEMA to come in.
Okay.
And that's on really mass casualty events.
Can you get a coroner from another county? Can y'all
Yes,
interact or interchange, whatever the right word?
well, they wouldn't actually have authority in Barber County no more than I do in Bullock or Henry County. But yes, the coroner in a mass casualty event would welcome any help they could get, especially in a county like Barber, where you don't have refrigeration. You have a limited number of facilities that can handle a mass casualty event. You get into the storage of the people, identification, notification, especially if a Greyhound bus or a plane that was from somewhere on the other side of the country crashed or had some sort of event. It could be an extended amount of time before you could identify some of the people. So, yes, a coroner would pretty much welcome any kind of help.
Now, you brought up something. I'm trying to get us out of here, but you brought up something. Do you have the power to call FEMA?
Yes, any coroner in Alabama has the authority to call FEMA, and I'm not sure about the EMA directors. I'm not sure exactly on their thing, but yes, a coroner can request FEMA.
No. Okay, I didn't know that. I sure didn't know that. But listen, again, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
And we're going to do this again.
Anytime, if you bring a praline the next time.
All right, I'll do that. I'll do that. I hope you do that. Thank you so much.
All right.
You have been watching Gumbo Live downtown Eufaula at the Bread Basket, and we've been blessed and enjoyed our visit with Mr. Chip Chapman. I'm going to try to say that fast one day, man. I tell you what. Chip Chapman. And we thank him very much. And we thank you for watching. Keep listening to us.